Hey, it's Beyond the Session, the show where you get to hear what therapists are really thinking. As always, we ask our friend ChatGPT to give us an intro. Here's what it says today. Peek behind the curtain of therapy and hear what therapists are truly thinking when the clock strikes closing time. There's just always furniture, a couch, a curtain, a wall, a door.
I think ChatGPT is running out of ideas.
Maybe. I think ChatGPT is fixated, which is appropriate because today we're talking about fixed versus growth mindset. You like that? How do we change the way that we think and get out of our patterns? And why is that even important? It's a little bit more of theory today, more than practice, but we will talk about how this plays out in a therapy setting. I guess first off, let's talk about the underlying values that are being implied when we talk about how we need to move from a fixed mindset into a growth mindset. Is that something that always needs to happen with people? Is there something wrong with having a fixed mindset and something better or even a benefit of having a growth mindset?
So I think when we're talking about fixed and growth, I think it's popular enough that most people have heard it before because of the, I guess you can call it a groundbreaking book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. And she would be actually the kind of the head or lead researcher on this topic, recognized by a lot of the academic circles as well.
I've seen that book on our stairs for a while now, and I haven't actually picked it up to read it. So why don't you tell me about it?
Well, and it's funny because I remember going to a school and I saw the posters on the walls as well, talking about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. So it's obviously caught on in some circles and is being kind of taught, right? A fixed mindset and growth mindset is a readily observed two subcategories of attitudes, I guess, that you can measure it, and you can also see that in every strata of society that there is a camp within it that is fixed and a camp within it that is growth. If you follow the cutoff lines, I guess, between the two.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what the observation is that in most cases, the growth mindset subset of the group usually outperforms, in the long run at least, the fixed mindset group. And that's why it is desirable. In all sorts of correlations, the growth mindset is correlated with positive things like flexibility and success and resilience and all these other good things that you're looking for, whereas the fixed can be correlated with some of the things that are the outcomes that people were not really looking for,
such as staying in the same pattern and never growing, basically, right?
Yeah, if you want to get to at least from the book's point of view, the core belief between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset is that intelligence is either static or dynamic.
Okay.
And so you can go pretty far with believing that intelligence is static. So let's say, and actually a lot of people who are in a fixed camp, it's because they are intelligent that they believe this, because they've been told so, right? They would do something well, and adults would praise them and say, wow, you're so smart. And so there's now this dichotomy in their minds that I'm either smart or not smart. And that's a fixed mindset.
Yeah.
When you have a fixed mindset, what happens is you now need to protect your status of being smart. And that's why when I hit certain challenges that might give me an evidence otherwise, I just give up on it. I don't want to find out that I'm not as smart as I think I am. And so it creates a blockage from growing because intelligence is, in my mind, static.
Is that why, with parenting, we're changing the way that we talk to kids? We're not saying, oh, you're so smart. Instead, we're saying you worked so hard, or we're praising their effort instead of their intelligence, for example.
Yes, exactly. That is probably rooted from studies like this. Yeah, hearing that more and people are using that more.
Yeah, because I guess the fear there is that the kid is going to, at a young age, accept if I behave a certain way, then I'll get a certain praise. And I'm just going to keep replicating that to get the same praise instead of looking for other ways to exert my creativity or my intelligence.
Yeah. There's another stream of study that is also very popular, another really popular book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, I think. And the big thesis there is that people who are able to have a stickiness to them towards a goal in the long term, they are the ones who are able to succeed, right? And so I think the growth mindset has a lot to do with that. If I have a fixed mindset and I get hit with setbacks, then I kind of shut down. Whereas someone with a growth mindset loves the setbacks and the challenges because it gives them an opportunity to grow and to challenge themselves. I think that's probably one of the mechanisms or reasons why someone with a high growth mindset end up succeeding so much, is because they have more grit, more resilience.
Yeah. I actually saw a reel the other day about this guy. It was those guys that go up to people in fancy cars and ask them what they do for a living, right? And this guy's driving a Rolls Royce, and he's a billionaire. And he said the mistake that a lot of people make is that we trade time for money. We go in and clock in a 9 to 5 job, and then in exchange, we get a paycheck for that. He said the attitude of people who are ultra rich is that instead they look for creative ways to generate wealth that doesn't trade time for money. So, I mean, it's an extreme example, but the growth versus fixed. The fixed is saying, I go in, I do my job, I get my pay, versus what other ways can I generate wealth here? What ideas can I bring to life?
Yeah, there's like this creativeness to it, right? That has this sense of like, I always need to grow. I always need to learn. Entrepreneurs don't like status quo, and that's why they push and create, right? Yeah, I would say that a lot of entrepreneurs probably have a more of a growth mindset, at least the ones that make it, right?
Yeah. And there's definitely a personality structure going on there as well. There's certain people are more drawn to that type of employment, right?
Well, and like there's entrepreneurship and creativity within jobs too. So so people can be very creative and growth oriented if they're not cut for or wired in a way where they want to be an entrepreneur or owner of a company, right?
Yeah. And they can be pioneering, or even I think there's a sense of openness to education and wanting to learn even within the confines of whatever role you're in, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you just have this flexible approach to your entire life necessarily, but it means that you are looking for ways to innovate all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's two types of innovation, right? There's the type where you're coming up with lots of new ideas and trying new things, and it's the type where you are always renewing your process, right? You're trying to make it better and better. But both are growth oriented, right?
Do you think that a growth mindset is characteristic of our generation and younger generations?
Ooh, I'm not sure.
Okay, let me flesh out that thought. I'm just thinking about my grandparents' generation. The gold standard was to finish your high school, get a career track job, and work it until you retire and get a pension. And it's just like a very fixed way of living your entire life. Whereas our generation is more about, hey, what creative ways can I bring in income, or even just the sense that I don't necessarily have to do this job forever if I don't like it.
Yeah.
There's more of an openness for change in our lives, a receptiveness to change, maybe more flexibility towards that.
Yeah, maybe. I am hesitant to definitively say anything without data to back it up. But I mean, we're talking about careers here. It's kind of the reality of our situation now, that the traditional route of finding one job and sticking with it for your whole life seems to be either disappearing altogether. So you don't even have the option for it.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's not able to provide anymore the kind of lifestyle that you grew up knowing. So people are forced to become really resilient. Like we said, every strata, there's the fixed and the growth, right? So the young people are being faced with the same thing. The growth ones are the ones that says, this is very challenging, so I'm going to adapt and I'm going to win within what I'm given. And then there's the other ones who are like, I'm going to shut down.
Yeah.
Right. I can't do it. Society sucks, so I'm gonna become a recluse. So that's why I was hesitant to say, like, is this generation better? Like, I don't know if they are. I think they're just given a different kind of environment that they need to now step up to the challenge and have a growth mindset about it, or have a fixed mindset about it and shut down.
I think where I'm going with this is, again, we're back to the value statement of, is it better to have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Is there a difference in value there?
I mean, I think from what you've been hearing so far, we are touting for a growth mindset here. And the scientists are touting for a growth mindset here. The writer, Carol Dweck, she wrote in her book, that she is of a fixed mindset. And she's intelligent and successful. So that's why we're not saying like, oh, you're unintelligent and not going to succeed if you're fixed. But it's something that on her own admission, I think measurably she would be in the fixed camp, and her husband was more in the growth camp. But the point too, though, was I think she was making is that by the mere recognition of the two attitudes, you can catch yourself and say, oh, I'm doing fixed thinking right now. Therefore, I can change and use a growth mindset thinking about this. And if my pattern starts moving that direction, I can become growth oriented.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's not necessarily better or worse. It's just helpful to have an awareness of what kind of thinking or what kind of patterns you're having in your life.
Right. I think we probably have a tendency to be more fixed or growth generally, maybe. But even I might have some areas in my life where I'm very growth oriented, and some areas of my life where I'm very fixed mindset. Right. And so, like, yeah, I think in most cases we are looking for growth, because growth, I think I heard this one time on a podcast. The opposite of emotional wellness and health is rigidity, but flexibility is what we're trying to train people. That's the whole thing about therapy, is helping people to be more flexible. Is because reality is not fixed. Reality is dynamic. So you have to become dynamic to be able to adapt and face reality.
Yeah.
Right. Fixed is comfortable. So what we're trying to say here is that there's maybe seasons where you don't have to be pushing and growing in all the time, because you need to rest, right? Yeah. But then there's seasons that you have to grow. So
too, about how our environment kind of dictates whether we need to have a growth or a fixed mindset. Like, for example, right now, people our age are trying to pay a mortgage they can't afford. So they have to get creative, right? There has to be a growth mindset. And that's something that we've almost been pushed into. It's something, I mean, it's a different experience than what, my great grandparents went through in the 1930s. But in the same sense, there was a hardship that was going on that forced them to be very creative. Just their entire approach to how they're living their life and how they're using commodities is completely different because of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the 30s. And, there's basically a famine going on. So, not to make light of their experience, but in the same sense, the pressures of our society force us, in a sense, to get creative. And I think that's why our generation is more entrepreneuring, for example, than our parents' generation, who could afford their houses, with one income. Or I think environment also plays into that. There's a little bit of a rich or poor thing. Like, some people have the luxury of having a fixed mindset. They can do the same thing every day and they can afford it. They've got old money and they can go sit by the pool and, choose what they want to spend their money on. And it's just, they don't have to think twice about it. Whereas those that are working class and more strapped for cash, again, have to have more of a flexible approach and get more creative with how they're using their time and resources.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I think to the reels that you were talking about before, the young guys going around and asking questions. The one that you showed me is the young man asked the same question: is, have you been broke before? And all these really ultra successful people have been broke before.
Yeah.
So they clawed their way out of it. And then you look at the general old money, usually in the third generation, it disappears, right? And it's because there's this comfortableness to it that made you not hungry, right?
Yeah. Or there was no necessity. And I think necessity is the mother of invention. That's what my mother likes to say. There's something about scarcity that brings out this creativity in us and this desire to be inventive and productive and, to output our energy.
Yeah. And I think that it brings me back to when we first moved here and decided on a whim to start a business from scratch. And like, the joke is, like, back then our meals was noodles and eggs because that's all we can afford. Yeah, we made very little money. And in that season, it was uncomfortable, and it pushed me to be so intent and creative and drive to make it work somehow. And then now that things are a little bit more comfortable, the lethargy comes in. It's like, I want to just rest from this.
Right.
I don't want to be creative right now. And yet there has to be cycles of, where I have to come back to that, or else stagnant always leads to decline as well.
Well, and You're right. Like poverty is a great motivator, but there's also something called the poverty mindset. And the poverty mindset can be a fixed mindset in itself. The one where you're always reaching for handouts and looking to the system to owe you something. Lack of resources doesn't always mean that you have a growth mindset, and it doesn't always motivate you towards one.
Right. That's why we say every strata has these, right? Like you have, I have a friend who told me about someone they know. So this is a friend of mine who sold a company and made a bunch of money. So they did the entrepreneurial thing for a season. But once they got that money, they decided to invest it and say, I'm going to live off of it, and just gave up, and it became a miser, because now everything's about tracking and making sure I don't lose this money instead of being creative and risk taking. And yeah, so that's why you can be a growth oriented person and become a fixed oriented person too.
I think it's really curious how our talk keeps circling back to finances and resources and money and employment, right? But there's something about the growth and fixed mindset that does speak to our internal motivations. And I think that money is a huge motivator for us because we need it to, survive, get the food we need, pay for our living situation.
Yeah, I think it's easy to jump into a fixed mindset when things are overwhelming. And that's why a lot of people don't, like, oh, I'm just working hard so that I can retire. So I can finally stop.
Yeah.
this pressure of responsibility on me. But yeah, but we're not made to not work. We just deteriorate when we don't have purpose and passion for something that uses our problem solving minds to do something about it.
Yeah, that's actually something I've been reflecting on just in my own life lately, is how we're made for a lifestyle that is full of active, productive, helpful work. It makes me think back to, decades ago when I was planting trees, which is a very physically demanding job. You're literally getting paid for every little tree that you're putting in the ground, and you're, walking over stumps and rocks and holes all day long. But a little life lesson that I learned during that difficult employment season was that I'm capable of very hard work when I'm motivated by money, especially. In that case, like, I was always trying to beat my own record and plant more trees than I did the day before and hit a certain quota. But I was able to push myself. And as I pushed myself, I'd get stronger, and then I could push myself more. And there's something about the way that we're made that we're actually capable of doing a lot. Something inside of our minds and in our bodies is designed for us to be productive and hardworking and creative and contributing, to society, to our families, to the system, in a sense. Like, there's something inside our being that craves meaningful, purpose-driven, productive work that's contributing to the greater good.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that binds all of humanity is that we love stories, right? So it's such a huge part of culture, of who we are. And think about it this way, right? Like a story with no conflict is not a worthwhile story.
Yeah.
And that's why we actually need, well, that's where that purpose thing comes in, right? We need drama in our lives to have some sense of we're alive, right? That's why when lives are too comfortable, people actually create drama in their life. Right. I mean, we see so much of that in our society because we're super comfortable in some ways, right? And because of that, all sorts of new kinds of problems arise out of thin air because we want to be a part of a bigger story.
People are drawn to activism when they're not in a wartime. Storytelling is a good way to see a growth versus fixed mindset, right? Whenever we're watching a movie, or especially a series, if we get through a couple seasons and you're like, oh, this character's not developing whatsoever. They keep making the same mistakes over and over, and they're not actually progressing in any way, then we'll just shut it off. Like, I don't want to watch this. It's just like depressing in some way. There's something stagnant about it that's frustrating to us. There's always a desire in us to be better and to see other people be better too, right?
Right. Like every good story is you're following along the journey of the hero or the multiple heroes, depending on how complex the stories get. And there is an ideal of sorts that they hold on to, and there is an opposing ideal that is causing the conflict all the way along. And then at the very end of the story, there's usually some form of integration of those ideas. And that's why they finally feel they become wise. They grow up a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And these are like tropes in literature. What was that book you read about how to have
my story is better than your story?
Yeah, my story can beat up your story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are actual patterns that storytellers use because for some reason we are drawn to that kind of a narrative, right? It's like written into our existence somehow. So then how does all of this relate to what clients are going through in the therapy room and how you can help them to recognize if they're having a growth or a fixed mindset, or to move from one side to the other if they need to?
Well, I think, again, it comes down to the definition of it. So you start defining it and you show them, like, okay, someone who has a fixed mindset, they believe that intelligence is static. The way that comes out is usually I face a challenge and I shut down, or I see someone else's success and I'm envious of it. And the opposite of that would be the growth mindset, that I see someone else's success and I celebrate it because I'm so excited for them. Because my intelligence is dynamic, it doesn't mean that I'm threatened by it, right? Because I'm still growing. So then you just have to be able to catch that mindset for whatever that situation is that the client is coming in with. And I talk often about positive psychological states and how you can develop those. And I think that there's a lot of similarities here too. So it's like, what can I control? What can I not control? A fixed mindset would just look at what I can't control. A growth mindset would say, let's just look at what I can control.
Yeah.
Right? Or optimistic thinking, right? A fixed mindset will see very pervasive negative thoughts and believe them. A growth mindset will challenge it, right? A fixed mindset would say it's hopeless, I can't do anything about this. A growth mindset would say, what's the vision? What are the different pathways towards it, right? A fixed mindset would say, I'm not able. A growth mindset would say, how can I become able? So yeah, like even as I'm just laying this out, you can see why you want to have a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset.
Yeah. And I think by nature, most of the people coming in for therapy are demonstrating a growth mindset because they believe that they can change. They want something more or something different in their life. They realize that whatever they're stuck in, it's not benefiting them. It's actually harming them. They're not enjoying it. It's not the life they want for themselves. So I think that's most of the cases that come in. The exception might be, you've got clients coming in whose partner forced them to come and they're not interested in changing. They don't see any hope. Occasionally you have couples where they don't even want to move forward together and you have to tell them, sorry, this isn't going to work because you don't have any goals here. There's nowhere for us to grow.
Exactly. Like if someone tells me like there is no desire to and no possibility for change, then we're already up against an uphill battle, right? So at the heart of therapy, I think, is the capacity and ability for someone to change or to be dynamic. In other words, a growth mindset.
Yeah. So I guess how important is it for clients to become aware of limiting beliefs in therapy so that they can progress? Can they move forward if they have a fixed mindset?
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about, the aha moments now of therapy, right? Like the whole point of talk therapy is that as I'm talking things out with someone, I make realizations about myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so that happens often in my therapy sessions. They're talking and they're like, oh, I just made a realization. And so that means they just gained insight into themselves because they were talking out loud. And now that they have made that insight, they can either challenge it or change it or grow it, right?
What's your role in that? Right? Is it your job to point out people's fixed mindset, or how do you kind of tease that out of people?
Sure. I mean, my role is asking good questions, sometimes sharing some stories to illustrate things, and summarizing what people are saying. Because when you hear a summary of what you just said to somebody, that acts as a reflection for you. Or maybe have not used it in certain words before, but now that you put it that way, I really resonate with that, right? So that's the interesting thing about language itself, right? Is that there's this intangible something that I'm trying to express, and language clarifies it for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes when someone else comes in and gives you the language for it, it clicks together. So my role is not to inject per se ideas into you, but to basically just reflect what you're saying long enough for you to make out your own patterns. Or because the thing is, if I just tell you, you might not believe it, but if you tell me, then you will start believing it, right? The other role I can do is bring in outside data in an objective manner and say, well, this is what some studies are showing, or this is what some people have said before. And sometimes that's helpful too, because it's just not even in my schema. But now that I have this extra data, I can now start forming thought patterns around it.
Yeah. So then when your clients start to become more aware of their thought patterns and they're starting to see it a little more objectively when you're relaying it back to them, how does it affect their emotional response and other things like anxiety, depression, moods that are happening?
I mean, it just depends what we're talking about. An example, one time it was related to trauma. And so there was a moment of clarity there when they connected the feelings that they had in this event to another event when they were in their childhood. And then you just see a smile spread over. And it was, and which was a weird thing for me, because it's like, this is a scary thing from your childhood that you remembered, but they made the connection for, oh, that's why this was so scary to me, even though it was a very separate event. And then something in them like healed from that.
It's almost an acceptance that happened.
Yeah, it's like a relief of understanding my cycle underneath that I couldn't see before. So I was confused about it all along. But now that I can make the connection, I can name it for what it is. And then now I have power over it.
How do you help clients when they're resistant to changing beliefs that they've had for a really long time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a form of motivational interviewing is the fancy word for it, which is just asking good questions again. Like the general questions would be, what is the benefit of not changing? What are the consequences of not changing? Or what are the benefits of changing? Or the consequences of not changing? So when you are able to kind of talk through those four pieces, sometimes it clicks together and you can make a case for it. I mean, in change of motivation, you have to be able to cast some doubt on whether the benefits of not changing is really that good.
Yeah.
Right.
So then how does developing a positive mindset influence a client's overall well-being, their mental health, their physical health, their relational health, and how can it benefit them in the long run?
So I think when we're talking about fixed and growth mindset, it's such a broad topic because you can have fixed and growth mindset in any area of your life. We talked about careers, we talked about relationships. Having a growth mindset in a relationship means that you're now flexible in how you view your relationship and growth with a person, which is always dynamic, right?
Because they might not be wanting to change and grow.
Yeah. So you become resilient. You become wise. You know when to say something, when not to say something. You know when to push and when to pull. That's what growth affords you, which means that you have more savviness around navigation of the social, your social life, right? And that's, of course, that benefits you in many, many ways, from your health to your financial health to your well-being. So yeah, I would say that staying fixed is a recipe for stagnation and decline, and growing is a recipe for adapting, because reality will always be changing. So you need to continue to adapt with it.
Thanks, Lindsay. This has been Beyond the Session, brought to you by Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. If you would like to book a session with one of our therapists, you can visit resetbarrie.ca, and we'll see you next time.